Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast. I'm Robert Bryce. On this podcast, we talk about energy, power, innovation, and politics. And I'm pleased to welcome Miss America 2023, Miss Grace Stanke. Welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm stoked to be here. This is going to be a ton of fun. I'm a nuclear engineering student, so I do a lot of work within the energy field and electricity overall.
Okay, so now you already kind of beat me to the punch here, Grace, and you're obviously fully caffeinated here in the morning. That's okay.
Oh yeah. Like I said, early morning, so caffeine was going.
No problem. But I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. You kind of already have, but guests on this podcast introduce themselves. So now, of course, I've said you're Miss America 2023. You have said you're a nuclear engineering student, but imagine you've arrived somewhere and you don't know anyone and you have about 60 seconds to introduce yourself. Please do so.
Yeah, my name is Grace. I'm Miss America 2023, also a nuclear engineering student. And beyond those two things, which I find those are two very big parts of my life, I also like to talk about me as a human being, where I talk about I'm a classical violinist, a competitive water skier. I love going to national parks here in America and appreciating the nature for what it is. And I'm really incredibly blessed to have this year as Miss America to travel the country and the world talking about nuclear energy and electricity, dispelling misconceptions and myths, while also learning more about the world myself. You know, I'm a 21-year-old woman that's really had an incredible experience throughout this opportunity.
Okay, so national parks, which one's your favorite?
Ooh, I love Glacier. I'm a Glacier National Park girly through and through.
Okay, I haven't been there, so I'll recommend Big Bend, which may be the polar opposite, not quite the polar opposite. Well, it's a long way from Glacier, but I live in Texas, and so Big Bend National Park, it's not on the way to anywhere. It's rugged, it's dry. There's a lot of cactus, but it's amazing. So,
so funny story about Big Bend. Actually, I was initially planning on spending spring break doing Big Bend and Guadalupe Mountains and then White Sands. I was planning on doing my spring break this year there, but then I ended up becoming Miss America, so plans changed a little bit. But
just ruined your whole life, didn't it?
Yeah, it really just was a super big inconvenience, you know. No, it really hasn't been that at all. It's been really wonderful, and I've had a ton of other opportunities. But Big Bend is high on my list. That's one that I haven't been to that I really do want to make it to soon.
Well, like I said, it's not on the way to anywhere. You have to intend to go there. Yeah. So, well, so let's talk about nuclear, because that was one of the, I know you've been on a number of shows, been interviewed many times about this issue, and I've been adamantly pro-nuclear for a long time. And
love that.
So you're studying to be a nuclear engineer. I know that I read up on you. You did it to spite your dad a little bit, but I'm joking a little bit, but it's also part of your goal to get more women and girls into science, technology, engineering, and STEM is math, right? Yeah. I just looked it up. 16% of nuclear engineers are female. 16%. Yes. And what's the ratio at, you're going to the University of Wisconsin. You've taken a year off. Is that right? And you'll be a senior when you go back?
So I'm in my last class right now. I'm finishing up my degree this semester. So when I became Miss America, I had one semester left. So I just spaced out the 5 classes throughout the year and have been doing it online. So my initial graduating class, so this spring when I was supposed to graduate, which I did walk, this spring, there was a total of 3 women that graduated. 2 of us had taken a year off. I took a year off to do a co-op with Constellation, and one of my friends, she took a year off to do a co-op with the International Atomic Energy Agency. So there was only one girl that was like part of that group initially. And then now I don't know the current class that's graduating just because I've been doing online school, but it is growing, across America.
So, but just to interrupt, sorry, three out of how many students in nuclear engineering?
There was a total that walked this spring. Undergraduate, there was about 15 at UW-Madison. Okay. Our graduate program is probably the bigger program at UW-Madison. I don't know the exact enrollment, but it's something that has had its ups and downs, but we're currently on an up. I was just going to mention, this fall has been a really big year for universities and with an undergraduate nuclear program. Georgia Tech saw a 40% increase in enrollment of nuclear engineering undergrads. I'm going to say that's largely because of Vogtle opening. Right. So we had the first new nuclear power plant come online in 30 years down in Georgia. But even within UW-Madison, we had a 20% increase this fall, which is insane. Like, that's a really, really good step in the right direction for the universities, where we're seeing that growth again and that excitement towards nuclear. And I think that's reflected in society overall.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, but then you've talked about this before about trying to get more women and girls in. Let's start there. I want to talk about nuclear
Sure.
engineering and nuclear technology more generally. But Maria Korsnick is the head of Nuclear Energy Institute. She's a nuclear engineer. But there are very few, and I've been watching this for a long time. 16% today in your class, so 3 out of 15. I don't know what that percentage is off the top of my head.
Yeah.
It's relatively small. What has kept what is keeping women and girls out of engineering and math more general and the sciences more generally? You're 20 years old now, 21?
21, yes.
You're 21. So how do you see it as someone who's in college? My youngest is out of college now. I mean, did you get resistance yourself? What are you among your peers, like your women, do they just not consider this? How do you motivate people like you, women like you to do what you're doing?
For me personally, I've never felt any restrictions being a woman in engineering. I've never felt like I can't do this. I've never felt like there's been experiences that have stopped me from pursuing this career, which I really want to talk about. I think culturally there is some work to be done, but I think that's a parenting issue in America. I don't think that that's a cultural engineering issue, in a sense of making sure we're treating others with respect and treating others as human beings first. So this comes to how, when I do school visits, that's a big statement. So give me 1 second. When I do school visits, it's interesting because, Miss America markets me as this champion for women in STEM, and I am. I firmly have recognized my ability as a role model for young girls to see themselves in a position in nuclear, which I'm so thankful for. But when I go to a school, I don't single out the girls and say, you should be a nuclear engineer. Because for me personally, I'm just going to tell you an experience I had this year. I had an experience this year where someone was trying to hire me and they said, Grace, we really admire what you do. We really want you to come work for us. One, because you're a woman. And to me, that is infuriating. When I have a very big list of qualifications and the first thing they could come up with was my biological makeup. So when I go into schools, when I am talking with kids of all different backgrounds, all different, whatever they believe in, wherever they come from, socioeconomically, politically, ethnically, gender, whatever they are, I don't care. I just want them as human beings. I want to get to know them because different opinions, different backgrounds is what makes the best teams. So what I do is I help kids find their passions, and whatever it is, maybe it's not engineering, but great. In nuclear, we need more communicators. We need more technicians. We need more tradesmen. There are so many different ways to be a part of this team and a part of this mission. So I help them find their passion, make sure that what they're doing for the next 40 years of their life is something they enjoy. And then I help them find a mission to serve, which thankfully, Generation Gen Z, our generational problem is climate change. So most people are pretty excited to help contribute to helping fight climate change. And one of those great ways is producing nuclear energy.
Well, let me ask you about that because that was one of the things that, okay, so I'm an old guy, right? I'm 63, and my generation had a different take on nuclear, but we had the specter of nuclear war in the background, right? And when I went to grade school, there was a bomb shelter, right? I lived in a house for a while that had a bomb shelter. This was, in nuclear, proliferation, nuclear weaponry, the Cold War was in full swing. Does your I'll ask it this way, does your generation see nuclear differently? And if so, and is it the specter of climate change that is the reason for that?
It is a massive difference. So my specific age group, so college age students right now, I would say know about Fukushima, know about the Cold War, know about World War II and things like that. But I had a really shocking experience where I was at a middle school, and I'm so used to talking about those things and explaining them and addressing how current reactors and advanced reactors are different from the reactor at Chernobyl and all of these things, right? I'm very comfortable talking about those. And I kind of started just automatically going into it at this middle school presentation. And I was talking about Fukushima Daiichi in Japan. So back in 2011, they had a nuclear power plant, had a hydrogen explosion, and it ended up causing 3 reactor units to melt down. The 4th did explode as well, but there was no fuel in it. So I'm very comfortable and used to talking about all of that. But these kids were looking around and they're like, what is she talking about? And I'm like, oh my gosh, like middle schoolers of today don't even know what Fukushima Daiichi is. They don't know about Chernobyl. They haven't been taught that.
Much less 3 Mile Island or,
Exactly. Exactly. So it is a really different generational thing because we didn't live through that experience. Now, I'm not discounting that experience because that is something that is so valuable. There is so much to learn from both of those incidents in the power sector. And when it comes to weaponry, that's a whole separate discussion, in my opinion. I promote the use of the science of the atom for peaceful purposes. And that's just where that's at. And I think it's really incredible, though, to talk about the energy side of things and how much we learned from Chernobyl, from Fukushima, from 3 Mile Island, how much the industry has changed. Like, it didn't just change in America after 3 Mile Island, it changed globally. And, you know, no other industry has that level of learning. And I think that's really, really incredible.
Well, so agreed. And I was lucky. I went to fortunate in many ways and fortunate in a whole lot of ways. I went to Fukushima Daiichi this year when I was in Japan. And I mean, incredible experience, right? To actually see it, right? It's one thing to talk about it, another to see it. But a couple of questions about that, because the fear of radiation around Fukushima was the more deadly, was the killer, right? It wasn't the radiation itself, right? They evacuated the prefecture, and that the studies have shown that the health effects of the evacuation were more severe than any of the effects that might have occurred from radiation. So I want to ask about the industry more generally, but you're obviously passionate and you care about this stuff, but is the fear of radiation the thing that's holding it back? Because you've also been critical of the nuclear industry as well, but is that fear, this kind of you can't see it, can't smell it, can't taste it, is that one of the key issues that we have to overcome?
I don't know if it's necessarily a fear anymore. So I was at Fukushima Daiichi as well, actually, just a couple weeks ago. So that was very recent. I just think it's a lack of knowledge. I find that most people today
fair enough, but how do we change that? I mean, I agree with you, and broadly, but that is such a hard thing to do. How do we change that?
For me personally, I was one of those people, right? Growing up, you kind of mentioned I got into this field out of spite because my dad told me not to go into it. I knew nothing about nuclear. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I'm like, I don't really know what's going on with radiation here. And the thing that convinced me, that changed my mind, and this is something that I do in turn when I'm working with other people, is I learned where nuclear exists all around me. Like it really is all around us. If you like
where radiation exists all around.
Radiation, nuclear science, it's kind of all in one big nutshell.
Oh, okay.
Like, because nuclear science is working with radiation, right? That's where radiation stems from, is nuclear technology and nuclear applications. And I think it's interesting, though, because like if you like bananas are actually naturally radioactive. We don't do anything to them and they're just a little bit radioactive. Everything quite literally is. But the more notable things like smoke detectors, the reason you take the battery out and it just keeps beeping, sorry, that's nuclear technology. And there's so many.
Why is that? Explain that, because I just bought some smoke detectors. What is it? What is the science there?
Oh my gosh. Okay, I want to make sure I get the specific isotope correct. So I'm just gonna quick Google it. Because I always smoke detector radiological isotope. I always get it wrong just because. So americium. There we go. Americium 241 is what's in there. That it just when you take the battery out, it makes sure that it keeps working. That's just a safety perspective for fire detection, right? You want to make sure that those smoke detectors work, but the batteries are a good primary source and things like that. And also it just makes sure that you keep that battery in there and you actually replace it. So it's really awesome because it affects us in our daily lives. I think another way that I talk about it, my dad's a 2-time cancer survivor. There's a lot of radiation treatments. There's a lot of uses of radiological sciences and medicinal isotopes that come from the nuclear industry that are literally helping to cure cancer. One of the stops I made in my Japan tour was at Osaka University, the Research Center for Nuclear Physics. And like they were talking about what they were working on, and it's medicine side of things. And they're like, yeah, we're working on curing cancers. And I'm like, oh, what type of cancer? And they're like, all cancer. And I'm like, oh, casual. Okay. Subtle flex. Love that. So it's really, really awesome because nuclear has more than just energy, more than just weaponry. It's available in medicine. It's available in agriculture. I'm from Wisconsin, and Texas has a huge agricultural presence too, right? We use it all the time. It's literally all around us. So that's one thing that really changed my perspective that I like to talk about with kids, with politicians, with nursing home residents, literally everyone and anybody.
How many events are you going to do during the year that you're Miss America?
Yeah, so I've been Miss America for about 11 months now. I'm on the tail end of it.
So it's for one calendar year, is that right?
It's from competition to competition.
Okay.
So I was crowned December of 2022, and then I will hand off the title January 14th of 2024. So I got a bonus month. Typically, It is approximately 12 months. But in the 11 months I've been Miss America, I have traveled 200,000 miles so far, and I will be probably hitting 250 in the next couple of weeks here. So it's
But
really
any guess? So hundreds of events, hundreds of interviews like this. This has been pretty much nonstop.
Yeah, interviews and podcasts are quite common. In terms of like in-person appearances from a week-to-week basis, I have to fly and travel, so I have travel days built into the schedule. I'm typically doing 2 to 3 events a week. So like this week with Thanksgiving, I'll be in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade doing some more just American culture stuff. But last week I was at Beaver Valley Power Plant and I was at Westinghouse. Like there's all sorts of different applications and things that I do as Miss America, which is awesome. It's really fun.
I would imagine. So, but you have the this is the wave you have to do at the
Oh my gosh, no! I wave like a normal human being.
So tell me about your dad. He was a cancer survivor. What was his cancer, and what was what isotope? I'm assuming it's an isotope they used to treat him. What was that?
Yeah, so he had Hodgkin's lymphoma, and it was he had it twice. The first time he went through it, I was in 4th and 5th grade. The largest presence of radiological isotopes and things like that and nuclear medicine was radiation treatments for him.
Right.
A lot of iodine detection and things like that as well. There's quite literally an endless list. I've asked, I was like, hey, can you get like a record? I'm like, can I see your medical records? But I think his doctor retired, so it's a little bit tougher to get him now. But it's been awesome because throughout this whole process, he's had multiple surgeries. He had his spleen removed the second time around. And I think one thing that's fun with any type of surgery, this isn't just cancer, all of the tools are sterilized using an isotope. I think it's cesium. And I think that's something that's really awesome to talk about and address, where it's used for sterilization purposes. It's used for all of those different applications within medicine.
Yeah, you got me Googling here, which I don't usually do when I'm doing podcasts, but it's
okay.
Dr. Chris Kiefer, who's with Canadians for Nuclear Energy. He's an ER doc, and he talks about this a lot, that in fact, the Canadian reactors, the isotopes that they generate sterilize something like half or more of all the surgical instruments in the world, which is really pretty amazing fact. So let's talk about the industry. Now, I know you've taken a job with Constellation. Is that correct? I read this somewhere that as soon as you graduate, you're going to be working for them.
Yes. So I'll be wrapping up my schooling this fall, and then I finish up Miss America in January. I'm taking a month off to do a young and dumb trip. I'm going to Africa. I'm going to go climb Mount Kilimanjaro. I'm super excited. And then I'll start working in March. So it's not exactly like finish up the degree and start working right away.
Sure.
I have a little bit of commitments in between.
Gotcha. But about that, and you're going to be working, I understand, in nuclear fuels, but you said earlier about the industry, and I found a quote that you said, I'm quoting you here. I believe that the chronic and potentially the fatal flaw of the nuclear industry is our communication. Mm-hmm. After an accident happened, the nuclear industry's solution was to disappear, hide behind a curtain. Now, I'll agree with you that the nuclear industry and the oil and gas industry, they do a terrible job of communicating their business, right? The renewable energy business is much, they have better sex appeal for some reason, for the public. But is it just that the industry, it's a hard thing for them to explain? Can you pinpoint how they could, I guess I'll ask it this way. How would the industry do better? That's one of the reasons why you've gotten a lot of attention, I think, and frankly, right? You're not a typical Miss America. You're an engineer, right? That's one defining thing. But if I said, okay, well, you're the head of the entire nuclear sector's public relations communications effort, how would you change? How do you get that done? How do you start and how are you going to be most effective at changing minds?
Yeah, I think the one thing I want to explain that quote a little bit more. So after 3 Mile Island here in America, the nuclear industry went, no news is good news. If we can operate without anybody knowing about us, that's a great day. Well, what that did is that allowed the media and all of these stories and all of these, literally The Simpsons, Godzilla, all of these sort of like just pop culture things to go rampant with this uneducated process of how radiation works and how nuclear science works and how all of that happens, right? And that's really frustrating because we had this media kind of taking over where, like I said, every supervillain in every movie ever, it feels like came from some sort of radiation thing or something along those lines, when at the end of the day, that's just not how radiation works, right?
Spider-Man.
Yeah, Spider-Man's a good one. We love Spider-Man and Iron
Right.
Man too, actually, two of my favorites. Iron Man's chest piece is like a miniaturized nuclear fusion reactor,
Right.
actually, which I think
Right.
is a super fun fact. So there is a couple of positive representations. I don't know if a radioactive spider is positive or not, but
Fair enough.
um,
But the
yeah,
idea about radiation and nuclear being in part of this pop culture and
yeah,
is very real. So I take it your points there, but I mean, how does the industry be more
yeah,
effective? What is it? What are the
yeah.
keys there?
Yeah, so as if I were put in charge, the biggest things that I would be doing is make it fun and make it accessible, right? I know nuclear for us, a boring day is a good day, right? Like that's also a phrase that's said a lot. But when I go into schools, the biggest thing with making it fun and making it accessible, I think the American Nuclear Society, they offer these workshop kits that I use in my classroom visits. So making cloud chambers where kids can actually see radiation happening. They can see the alpha particles moving through these little clouds. That makes it visual. That makes it accessible. Anytime I have anybody come with me to a nuclear power plant, or if they've gone to one, I've never seen anybody come out of a nuclear power plant against nuclear energy.
Mm.
And like I said, the two main things, making it fun and making it accessible. I think if we open up the doors a little bit more and get people involved, pre 9/11, we had so many facilities that I've been to have these museums and these energy centers and things like that, it was open to the general public where anybody could go in. This was outside of the security boundary, and they could learn how a nuclear power plant works. And they could maybe see some old parts or something like that, depending on how the museum is set up. Post 9/11, they shut down all of those museums. And I personally think we should be reopening them. One of the homecoming things that I did as Miss America. So context here of this story. When you become Miss America, the state organization puts on a homecoming celebration. So I did a big tour of Wisconsin in February. And on the final day, we went to the Point Beach nuclear power plant in Wisconsin, and they have one of these energy centers. Now they opened it up for that day. And it was incredible because the entire community came out to see this, to experience this museum, because even if they can't get into the power plant, they could learn about it in that scenario. And I think that that's such an awesome thing, that the education, the resources are there. We just kind of disappeared. We made that choice, but we can open those back up and have that outreach very, very present beyond just the local communities where these power plants exist, but also to entire states and things like that.
So Point Beach, I'm just pointing. It's owned by NextEra Energy and is
Yeah.
it's on Lake Michigan and near the city of Two Rivers, Wisconsin. I'm just trying to find the what the output is. Is it two reactors or one reactor? It's two.
They
It's
have,
two 1200 megawatt electric. I see two.
yep,
Yeah,
exactly.
Westinghouse. Right. Gotcha.
Yep.
Um, well, so I've been in many power plants. I've been in only one nuclear plant. That's the Indian Point nuclear plant in New York, which is now shuttered, criminally shuttered by former Governor Andrew Cuomo. May he rot in hell for his actions in that regard.
Yeah.
And you've been, I think it sounds like, to several nuclear plants. You got a favorite there?
I've been to 8 or 9 power plants internationally as well. So I went to Mihama Power Plant in Japan, which they decommissioned 2 units, but they did reopen one. And within America, I've had some really awesome opportunities, which I think it's awesome because each power plant has a lot of similarities. They all have a standard for excellence. They all have an amazing, amazing operational capacity. They all stay on time. One of my favorite things when I go to power plants is sitting down for that pre-job brief. So they always, before you go into the plant, they sit down with you and it's like, okay, so here's the plan. Here's where we're going to go, which I love it so much. It's great. So that happens everywhere. But each power plant does have its own culture. They have their own attitude. They have their own sort of environment, which I think is so, so awesome. I wouldn't say I have a favorite. Some standouts, I was at Vogel for my 21st birthday, actually, and I was in the control room of Unit 3 when they hit 75% power, which was really, really cool. Just to see that sort of history being made during a plant startup for the first time in 30 years in American history of a new reactor.
Right.
Yeah.
Vogel is interesting. I was in Savannah last week and heard a presentation about Vogel and all the difficulties and the cost overruns and it was overtime, over budget, the difficulties they had in getting it built and keeping their partners on board. And so, but that But let's talk about that then, because you're a nuclear engineer. You've looked at this, and I know you're going to work for Constellation. I know there's some constraints on how candidly you can speak here, but you've seen light water reactors. There are a lot of gas cooled reactors. There are a lot of paper reactors that are now trying to commercialize in the market. When you look at those, and if as an engineer, if you said, well, if we're going to pick one design, right, and would it be light water? Would it be gas cooled? If you could start with a blank sheet of paper and say, okay, well, I'm looking at this and really the one design that would make the most sense, what would that chemistry be? And how big would it be? Would it be gigawatt size? Or are you believer in SMRs? Give me your nerd out on, on type design, best chemistry, et cetera. Go for it.
Yeah. So for me personally, you're completely correct with Vogel. It did go pretty much twice the time and twice the budget of the initial planning, which is the biggest challenge with these massive light water reactors that we built in the 70s and 80s because of just societal and political and environmental changes. Building a new massive light water reactor power plant is incredibly difficult. What I think is going to be the best path forward from a complete perspective, this isn't just a technology side of things. This is from what is going to be the most likely possible in terms of political licensing, in terms of a community acceptance thing. I think small modular reactors using a light water coolant and moderation is going to be the best way to go, because using gas cooled and, these metal fuels and all of that is really, really awesome. And I fully support it. I think it's the coolest technology in the world. But that's completely new to people. Right. And change like that does not happen quickly in America, and especially nuclear, where it does need a thorough review. It needs a thorough check of what this process looks like. From a licensing standpoint, looking at NuScale's SMR, they spent millions and millions of dollars just to get licensed.
500 million,
yes,
just to put a fine point on it there.
Exactly. And it's something that is just such a process that I think in terms of the best path forward to have this kind of happy meet in the middle place of general public acceptance of nuclear, saying we do want a nuclear power plant in our backyard. These small 100 megawatt reactors, small modular reactors, I think will be the best way to go using water.
So if NuScale, you mentioned the cost to get licensed or get the reactor design approved, but now they have canceled the plan that they had at UAMPS in Idaho Falls. And so that's a big setback. So when I look at it, the only player in the market with that design is the BWRX 300, which is now being built in Canada. I'm sure you're aware of this, right? You know that they're going to build it at Darlington. So in that area, I think right now it appears to be a one-horse race, and that with GE Hitachi being the one that's in the lead, and NuScale went public and their stock has been punished. So it's the changes just in the last few months in the nuclear sector, I think, have been remarkable. Right, great success in getting Vogtle 3 online and Vogtle 4 in the next few months, but still a lot of challenges. So if we talked about radiation before. Handicap it then. I've written about this. I'm absolutely 100% behind nuclear, but I also am very sober about the prospects. I see I'll reveal my cards, and then maybe you can react to this. I think it's what are the biggest challenges? It's regulation, capital, and fuel. Would you agree, or is there another thing there? Or handicap those? We have to focus on the regulation first. We've got to solve these things together. How do you prioritize them? How would you prioritize them?
So the biggest, what I see within the current climate that we're in, I would completely agree with those three statements, like being big issues right now. But what I would broadly say is almost, we've got this sort of chicken and egg problem. We have the demand. We have companies that are kind of like, they're not signing it on paper yet, where they say, yeah, we want to build this. But then all of a sudden they're like, well, we don't see the supply chain for it. Well, the supply chain side of it says, oh yeah, well, we want to do this too, but we don't see anybody signing on the dotted line yet. So we're not going to start building this. So, and that kind of ties really closely into fuel, I think, especially here in America. One thing I've been pushing for is the Nuclear Fuel Security Act, which kind of restarts actually creating and producing our own uranium here domestically within the US. Right now, most of our uranium comes from Russia because of global politics and global climate and everything. Congress is considering completely stopping even the uranium trade with Russia. We kind of let that keep going for a little bit, but even that's at risk right now. And without that, we don't have a source of fuel for our nuclear power plants, right? So we just have this whole chicken and egg problem, I think, with the supply chain. Everybody supports nuclear behind closed doors. I spent a couple weeks ago in DC. I met with over a dozen congressmen and senators on both sides of the aisles. Right. Everyone is like, yeah, I'm all for nuclear, but nobody says it publicly. And what we need is bold leadership. We need that first one to be built. We need that first step to be taken. People are just scared of doing that. And I think that's something that is one of the biggest problems. I would agree completely with capital, regulation, and fuel as three of the main issues in terms of internally within the industry. Regulation, though, I think is sort of being solved. One other thing I've been pushing is the Advance Act for being included in the NDAA. That's like really relevant to today, so I don't know when this comes out, but that promotes supporting our current fleet, changing the licensing process for these advanced reactors, because if we follow the same licensing process, it's not the same technology, right? These advanced reactors are just kind of this different technology. And this is part of the reason why I like SMRs with light water, because they're going to have a place to start from the regulation side to build a sensible and logical structure for the licensing process for these future SMRs of similar concepts. Right? We can start with, okay, let's switch from a massive light water reactor to a SMR with light water. And now the next step after that is maybe a SMR with fuel, or with liquid fuel.
Well, and maybe that makes the capital problem a little less intensive, right? If it's going to be the BWRX is 300 megawatts instead of a gigawatt, right? So there's going to be less capital involved, and if it's a familiar chemistry, the regulatory problems won't be as much. And then the fuel part, that reactor, as I understand it, uses low enriched uranium, so that's already. That's the common fuel now. So we won't have to get HALEU or something else to make that work. Right. So,
exactly.
Right. So I can see that argument. And, but there's going to be, I think there are going to be a lot of companies that are going to try and push their reactor across the finish line, and they're going to have to go away because well, I'll put it to you.
Yeah.
If we can license and commercialize at scale more than one kind of reactor, or should we just be focusing on one?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question that I've thought a lot about. So globally right now, SMRs, we have about 80 different startup companies that are designing these SMRs and
is it that many? Is it 80? Yeah. Really?
It's actually a decent amount. There's a lot of people that are doing it. So there's a good amount of global presence and interest in SMRs. Sure. Now, if we have 80 of these all go through this process of licensing and say they do all get the funding for building a commercial reactor, well, now you have this workforce that's, going through 80 different designs and learning 80 different things, which is good from a learning standpoint, but not very functional in terms of changing the entire energy grid,
Right. Yeah.
So honestly, I think when you take that 80, it's gonna have to get narrowed down to, I think about 5 of them will make it through this licensing process in a sensible manner, in a logical manner. And then from there, it's going to come down to that supply chain issue. Who's going to be able to build that factory to develop these SMRs, because that's the strongest argument about SMRs.
And who's going to have enough capital to stay in the game, right? And so, and I think it was just in the last few days, TerraPower has said, "Oh, we're in for the long haul." Well, they have Bill Gates behind them, right? Which is a big advantage, right?
Yeah.
Let me take a quick station break. My guest is Grace Stanke. She is Miss America 2023. You can follow her on Instagram at grace.stanke. That's Stanke. She is also on Twitter at Grace_Stanke. And since we're doing a station break here, Grace, we talked about what's your call to action besides following you on Instagram and on Twitter. You want to cause trouble at the dinner table over the holidays. Is this what?
Yeah.
How did we end up formulating that before we came on before we started recording? Was challenge your family over dinner, or get in their nuclear face over the turkey or whatever? What's the question if your Uncle Jim is there and he's he's very smug about whatever he thinks he knows? How do you challenge Uncle Jim or cousin Billy or whoever over the dinner table?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is making sure that this conversation is happening. Most Americans do not know where their electricity comes from. They just pay the utility bill at the end of the month and that's it. It's just another thing on the to-do list, right? They don't think they have a voice or a say in this matter, or they don't think they have the ability to cause change of their utility bill at the end of the month. But we actually can. I'm a firm believer that public perception fuels policy, right? Your congressmen, your senators, they represent you. They represent your community. And when your community says, hey, we do want a nuclear power plant in our backyard, we want strong, reliable energy, we want emissions-free energy, we want high-paying jobs in the community, and we want millions of tax dollars because we want our roads fixed. That pothole out in the front yard, it's annoying, right, Uncle Jim? And that sort of thing. I think finding a way to bring it into that home base and have that conversation, realize that you do have a say in this, even though it is a $1,000,000,000,000 industry, it's something that the American people do have a voice in it. And I think that's incredible to make sure that that conversation is happening internally to spark that curiosity to learn more is what I always say. My goal is to make the one connection that hopefully is like, I like to say the neutron that starts the fission chain reaction, have that one conversation that all of a sudden
say that again. You want to be the neutron, the Jimmy Neutron. You want to be the neutron that spurs the chain reaction.
Yeah, I gotta have a fission pun in here somewhere.
Like
it wouldn't be a podcast if I didn't have a nuclear pun in here, right?
Right.
But honestly, though, it takes just one conversation, and honestly, that's what I've learned in DC. Is it's in terms of the advocacy on the politics side of things, it takes just one conversation, one young person going up there and saying, "This is what we want. This is what we care about, and this is what I want to see." Right? And that's not even a young person thing. That's just entire communities have the ability to make that statement, to be that bold leadership that I talked about. We need bold leadership, and it can be honestly from anyone. It can be from a company making that capital investment. It can be from politicians making that statement, but it can also be us as the American people.
Well, so what I've heard you say before, particularly when you talked about schools, right? That so if I'm going to feed back to you what I'm hearing you say, it's that you're trying to catalyze this, and you have a platform not very many people do, right? There are only 94 other Miss Americas. I think you're the 95th winner, right?
Correct.
But I mean, you're using the bully pulpit, and you're saying what I'm hearing is we need to do this education at the school level, which I think is very clearly missing. We don't have, in terms of particularly in the grade school level, that fun and accessible understanding of nuclear. Those are the words you used, but it's also within families. It's within the broader cultural, broader society. So am I right to think that you want to catalyze this change in the conversation? Are you that's one of your hopes? Is that a fair read of what you're talking about here?
Yeah, I would say broadly, my main mission as Miss America is to change the public perception of nuclear energy, right? It's to help America transition into this zero carbon energy portfolio that is being pushed. And I think the only way to sensibly do that from a baseload energy perspective, we need nuclear and we need hydro to make up that baseload energy, right? And we need to start building nuclear today. So that education doesn't just stop at elementary and middle and high school levels. That is primarily to ensure that we have the workforce to fill the needs of the United States nuclear sector, right? They just announced, actually, the United States DOE announced that they want to triple nuclear energy's capacity within the United States by 2050. Right. That's a lot. That's a lot. And we don't have the workforce right now to support that. So that comes to educating high schoolers of today to make sure they are working in this industry tomorrow. Now, however, we need the support everywhere today. I have this story that I tell in my speeches about how I had my misconceptions about people proved wrong. For a while, I didn't talk to the older generation. I'm gonna be straight up. I just was like, you know what? Y'all aren't going to be around in 2050, so why should I do it? I'm going to say it very candidly and very directly. So I was like, why should I bother trying to convince these people of supporting nuclear energy? And I went through,
and then you went to Capitol Hill and realized they're all old people.
Exactly. Honestly, but that's kind of how the story ends. Is the people that are in office today that are making these decisions for 2050, they're not going to be around in 2050. But we need that support today, because this has to happen on this timeline in order to make sense, in order to be logical, and in order to actually help fight climate change, right? So that's something that I think is so important, where we're including all generations at the table. That's something I've learned throughout this year, and throughout my whopping 21 years of wisdom that I have. I have a lot of learning left to do in my life. I want to say what I say is not the end all be all, but I think it's been incredible, because I've been a 21-year-old student sitting at these international tables in Vienna, in London, in Paris, in Tokyo, and all of these places. And we got to make sure we have that workforce development when we are building these power plants. And that's where the education for me at the high school level and below comes in. But it also needs to just start happening today. Because if we have this massive increase in workforce, we got to have the plants to employ them at as well.
Well, look, you've made me a fan. I got to tell you, I mean, how you use the Miss America, well, the tiara, I guess that is a tiara, right? Is that what they call it?
Actually, fun fact, it's a crown. So I didn't know this until like 6 months into my year. There's a difference between a tiara and a crown. I did not know that. Don't worry, it's not like a common knowledge thing, but a crown is like full circle. So the Miss America crown is full circle. I like to say it's more reminiscent of a king's crown versus a queen's crown, which I think is cool because I'm all about like power is what I say with energy and electricity. It's also power. Sure. And I think that kind of represents a little bit more powerful. So yeah, it's cool. And a tiara is not full all the way around. It's just like,
okay, well, good. I didn't know that either. I kind of
you learned something new today. Like I said, it was like 6 months into my year as Miss America.
But you use the crown as a way to because you could open doors, and I also found this quote that you said, "What's wrong with nuclear energy was never wrong." And this is the line that I really like. It was a brilliant, brilliant gift that we turned our back on. And I think that as I've thought about this and I've written about it, why is there this opposition, right? What is this? Broadly, there's an opposition among essentially all of the climate-focused NGOs in America, the Sierra Club, the Natural Resource Defense Council, Environmental Defense Fund. They all make these excuses. They're all anti-nuclear, or at least they won't talk about it, won't promote it. Instead, they promote this mirage around renewable energy. But I think that the way you a brilliant gift, I think that's right. But and we turned our back on it. Let me ask you a philosophical question, but is it something about this idea that the technology was too good, almost that we couldn't as a humans, that was like, oh, well, this is just too good for us or something, right? And there's a lot of that's been written about this, about the ideas around technology and so on. But why did we turn our back on it?
Have you seen Oliver Stone's Nuclear Now?
I'm very familiar with it. I have actually not watched it, but yes. But anyway, I'm going to.
Yeah, that's okay. So
I'm making my own documentary on nuclear, and so I haven't been kind of fully employed. But
that's awesome. Oh, that's so cool. That's awesome. So I think that they address this issue keep in mind, it's in a very Hollywood manner, why nuclear was stopped. Because you know what, in the 70s and 80s, when nuclear power plants were first created, people were like, great, by 2010, America's going to be powered 80% by nuclear. Like, this is the future. This is what's going to happen. So what happened in between there? And honestly, for me personally, my experience, my opinion, I think it's just, this is how capitalism works, right? That built competition that threatened other energy industries, and all of a sudden that led to all sorts of different things happening. And I think that's just competition between multiple different industries. Because it's funny, because I talk about energy and I talk about this transition to zero carbon. I have all these people, all these anti-nuclear people that are on Twitter that are always like commenting and all of that stuff. They're like, oh, wind and solar is the way to go. I'm like, I support wind and solar as well, right? Like, I am all for it. I support even using fossil fuels if we can figure out carbon capture and figure out an effective way to use that. I think there will always be a certain portion of the population in America that will need fossil fuels. Think about remote areas in Alaska where a miniature reactor still won't even make sense. So fossil fuels will always make some sense for some area. Now, I want to see that minimized, though, in my personal opinion, in my ideal energy portfolio. But I think that, we turned our back just because there was that fear, that lack of knowledge of radiation, of all of that stuff. I also think it was tough for nuclear as an industry as a whole to overcome that brutal first impression that we had on the world, because the world's first introduction to nuclear science was killing millions of people.
Was the bomb.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Exactly.
And the specter of that is still the proliferation, I claim, still are ones that are brought up around the nuclear energy sector. But let me, I'm interrupting, but that's what I do. I'm a podcaster. Okay. I interrupt a lot, but you said that part about the competition, and that's been an issue that I think is really important. You've talked about Congress and policy. Is government just simply going to have to take a bigger role here? And one of the ideas that I've heard lately is that the DoD, the military, is going to have to lead on this, because the private sector, you talked about competition earlier, right? Nuclear is a different animal, right? It's a different
Yep.
beast in terms of, you can't just let anybody decide they're going to build a nuclear. It requires a lot of regulation. It requires a lot of government involvement. Is government just going to have to finally just say whatever it is, the DOD or someone else? Well, we're just going to have to build them, like the Tennessee Valley Authority or some governmental entity is going to have to take the lead. Does that ring true to you?
So when you look at globally the successful countries, when you look at things like France, where it's 80%, 90% nuclear powered, the government does play a major role. Now in America, we have
same in Russia, same in China, yep. Same South Korea.
Exactly. It's a very the successful countries right now, they are government backed. Now here in America, I think it could go multiple ways. I agree with the DoD taking the lead. I think it's funny because SMRs right now, everybody's like, this is new technology, and it is to the commercial field. But what powers submarines? Right. And that's been around for 40 years.
And
it was small
carriers.
Modular reactors. Yeah. Like right. That's exactly what was powering submarines and these aircraft carriers with DoD applications. I think the DoD has so much science, and like maybe this is conspiracy theory level stuff, but I think they have so much knowledge and scientific stuff going on that like is at least a century ahead of the commercial world. Just like thinking about drones, I had a family friend that he worked at the Alaska Air Base, and drones have been around since like the 80s, and now it just is sort of being integrated into the commercial world, right, where people are using it for all sorts of different stuff here. But it's something that I think the DoD will definitely take the lead on that. I think they already have. They have Project Pele going on, which is a reactor that fits inside of a shipping container to power military bases for the Army. Their Air Force Base in Alaska, they contracted with Oklo, a company right. that's doing more micro reactor size, I would say.
And that was just a couple of months ago. By the way, I'm glad you mentioned Pele because I haven't looked at that very closely. Is that what's the output on that? Do you know that? Is it like 500 kilowatts? Is it a megawatt? How big is that reactor? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't know exactly what the output is. The biggest thing is they just needed it to power an Army camp, and they wanted it to be able to be picked up and literally just sitting on a truck at any point in time.
And do you know the chemistry? Do you know the chemistry on that? I should look it up. I probably should know this.
They're using triso fuel. I know that much. Where they're using a new type of fuel where it's little instead of pellets. So
right.
Pellets right now are currently about the size of your top knuckle of your pinky, but they're using it looks more like shot, actually, is what I would say. Like I grew up doing sporting clays and all of that stuff, and it looks very similar to just like the little pellets of right. shot for a shotgun shell. But it's little spheres of nuclear fuel surrounded by a cladding, and that's what they're using in that sort of technology. So it is a different process. It's going to have to go probably through a different regulation system and everything, but I think it's very, very possible.
Well, triso is what that's right. That's HALEU actually inside there, isn't it? And that's the same fuel that X Energy is using or planning to use in their design. We'll all have to follow up on Project Pele. So
it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is cool. So what's the hardest part of being Miss America?
Oh, one thing that people don't know. So this is a very travel heavy job, and it's a very isolating job because of that. I typically am traveling alone. I don't get to see my family. I was gone, I'm historically Miss America only went home for Christmas and Easter. Thankfully, I'm in my parents' house right now. and I have
that's in Wausau.
Yes.
Wausau, Wisconsin is your hometown, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. Yes. So it is a different circumstance where after COVID, that changed things. I also pushed heavily for a healthier work-life balance for the role of Miss America. And to me, if I was working for 3 weeks, then I should have 4 days off. That's just kind of like a little bit more of a healthier work-life balance there.
Sure.
And it's a very isolating job because of that. It's a smaller organization than people think. We have about 7 people employed at the national level. So it's not a massive company that you have all of these resources. It's a pretty small company, which for me, that's a big change going from working in the nuclear industry where there's schedules, there's all sorts of different resources, there's all sorts of different individuals to reach out to. Within this, that's not the case. So I've got to be ready for anything in terms of flexibility. I've had it where I walk into appearances and I was supposed to be there on my schedule. I had, I'm socializing and mingling at the Kentucky Derby for 4 hours or something like that. And then I walk in and they're like, oh no, you're our keynote speaker for an hour. And I'm like, oh, that's fun. So it's a lot of flexibility and adaptability and being comfortable with with that isolation almost. So that's something that, you know, I've been able to utilize social media and all of that to stay in touch with family, with friends, and everyone along those lines.
But so if I was going to read it back to you, it's just being on the go all the time that wears you out. Let me ask you something else, because I have not interviewed a Miss America before, and I think about I'll ask the question directly. Are beauty, you've done beauty pageants, I guess, for now 10 years, more than this, right, for much of your life. Are they an anachronism? I mean, it's, I don't, and I ask that respectfully, because it's just,
that's okay.
In today's world, it seems like, there is a Miss America, there is a Miss USA, there's, a different kind of vibe in the culture now about, women in culture and women in society and objectification. Are they an anachronism? How do you think about that?
Yeah. So for me personally, I never competed in swimsuit. I never competed. The scoring criteria for when I competed at Miss America, I was never judged on my physical body. Now, I will say I am a more traditional look. I am not the most beautiful woman in America, but I am 5'11". I am skinny. I have blonde hair, right? Like, I'm a little bit more of that traditional look of what you would expect. But I'm by no means the most beautiful woman in America. The reason I got involved in the Miss America organization is, one, it's a scholarship organization. I've earned almost $70,000 towards my education from competing. So my bachelor's is entirely paid for, and a master's degree as well if I wanted to go and get a master's. So that's an option that's on the table. The second major thing,
if I can interrupt, so the master's is prepaid then, if you decide to go back?
Or like, I have like a cash scholarship. It's not like I didn't walk out with a briefcase full of cash.
Yeah. That was my second question. It was $50,000. So that 50,000 in cash, you could, if you wanted to go back to school, you could use it for that, or you could buy a BMW if you wanted to, I guess.
No, I cannot buy a BMW. I cannot.
Okay.
No. It is only applicable to tuition statements only. So
all right.
It's like any other scholarship, right? It's just available for a certain period of time. So I think I've got like 2 or 3 years here to decide if I want to do a master's and to use that money. So they keep it, the organization keeps it. I request a X amount of dollars, and then they mail a check to the university.
Okay.
So it's not, I have never held that much money in my entire life.
Got it. Okay.
But it is something that, scholarships were a big part of it. Additionally, in high school, I was a very driven individual. I pushed myself academically. By the time I was 17, I graduated high school. I had the equivalent of an associate's degree in college credits. When I went into UW-Madison, I had about 72 college credits already built up. I pushed myself academically. I pushed myself with my violin. I was winning some national awards. I was regional awards, all of that stuff. I was starting to get into water skiing competitively, where I ended up doing that Division I in college, right? And so I was a very driven individual. Because of that, I didn't really find that I had a social circle I felt good in high school. I had friends, I had people that I spent time with, but I never really felt like they were people I actually wanted to spend the rest of my life with, which there's a couple, but I guess I didn't have that social setting and that social experience that most people did in high school. Going to compete at the Miss Wisconsin competition, just at the state level, I was with a bunch of other women who, it was cool to be kind. It was cool to be driven. It was cool to be ambitious. It was cool to be successful. It was cool to genuinely 100 support each other and cheer each other on. I have met a lot of friends that I am so thankful for. I'm headed to one of my best friend's wedding at the end of this year. She is actually my first runner-up from Miss Wisconsin. And she's been such a valuable friend to me. I'm going to Paris with my Miss Vermont next week, actually, for an appearance and everything.
A sisterhood of pageant contestants, then, I guess, would be the way to think about it. That's well, I hadn't thought about that, because how many pageant competitions I've watched, but they hugging it afterwards, and I'm wondering if they're actually, the women who aren't winning are going over, you bitch.
Yeah. Well, okay.
That crown would fit me.
Straight up. Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna be straight up with you, because Miss America does push this whole like sisterhood initiative a lot. Right. However, I'm just going to say, you put me in a room with 50 other women, I will be best friends with some. I will not be best friends with all of them. And I think that's completely okay to say.
Well, yeah.
Just in terms of, that's a lot of different people. You're not going to be best friends with all of them. But you know what? I respect each and every one of them. I know no matter who it is, like, no, I'm not best friends with all of them, but I know I can give them a call and they would be willing to help me with whatever. If whatever skills they have, whatever they can offer, like, I know that they would help me out in a circumstance that I need it, which I think is really awesome. But overall, it taught me some really great communication skills, I think, that you don't learn in an engineering degree.
Sure.
I think it actually helped promote my professionalism more in a way where I have now had this launch pad for my career where, I had this opportunity with Constellation where when I was talking about jobs, I could have done just core design engineering, but I wanted to also continue the advocacy work. Now, there's not many 21-year-olds that have this opportunity to say, I like core designing, but can we work in this into the job description as well? That's not a common thing that happens with entry-level engineers to kind of pick your own job
Sure.
description, right? So I'm really, really thankful for that, where it was a launch pad for my career and building this platform of different demographics of people. Because social media, typically you build this echo chamber, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
this is branching out where I'm talking about nuclear, not just to nuclear people. I'm talking about nuclear to the broader general America.
Sure. So I know I live in Austin, and graduates in petroleum engineering, I know from UT Austin with an undergrad degree are getting, starting salaries $120,000 or so. What is starting pay for a nuclear engineer roughly? Or do you know those numbers off the top of your head?
Yeah, I would say on average entry levels anywhere between 70 and 100, depending on where you're at. It goes up very, very quickly. So the position I was looking at prior to Miss America, I was going to be on track to be at, I think, like 180 within 10 years of working. And that's like if I just stuck with engineering. I didn't really, do anything crazy outside the box. I just went up through the engineering advancement track.
So that's a good wage.
Yeah, it's a very, very good wage. I like to always, when I go to high schoolers and I talk to high schoolers, talking about the trades work, you get nuclear grade welding certificates and everything, you're getting paid $250. Like it's insane the amount of money that there is in the trades work for nuclear, just because that is such a high demand industry and it requires a high level of skill. So honestly, if when I talk to people that are like, hey, I don't really want to pay for a 4-year degree, or I don't want to go through the typical college process, I'm like, go into trades work, get that nuclear grade certificates, and you're going to get paid double what somebody who did get a 4-year degree is going to be making.
Be a welder, be an electrician. Yeah,
exactly.
Well, so we're coming up on about an hour. And again, my guest is Grace Stanke. She is Miss America 2023. She's on Twitter at Grace_Stanke. She's on Instagram at Grace.Stanke. I always ask people to introduce themselves, Grace, and I always ask them 2 final questions. What are you reading? I know you're busy and you're traveling a lot, but I'm guessing that you've said you're driven. I'm imagining that you read a few books and find time for that. What are you reading these days?
Yeah, I love reading books on the airplanes. That's one of my favorite things during the boarding process. Right now, I'm reading
on a Kindle. You read on a Kindle?
No, so I like physical books. Yeah. I'm a physical book person because my eyes have gotten really strained from screen time and everything. So I got lots of eye problems. I'm an old lady on that front where my eyes are so bad. But
I'm an old man. You're still a young lady. You're a young woman.
Man.
But anyway, go ahead. But so what are you reading?
I'm reading Ask More, The Power of Questions. I don't know the author off the top of my head. I would have to double check. It's a former CNN journalist, though. And it's really fascinating because one of the best things that I've learned this year as Miss America is sometimes it's better to just shut up and listen, right? Not everything that I have to say needs to be said. Like sometimes it's better to just sit down and listen to the people I'm working with, which, when I talked about how I approach most situations, most of the time I just get to know the person first. That's what I start with. And this book is really about sort of different approaches to use questions as tools to also deliver a point in a different manner than making a statement, right? Helping other people come to a conclusion without saying the conclusion explicitly. So I really like it. It's funny because I used to make fun of my dad for reading all of these like leadership books and professional development books. And now here I am. I'm like, oh, wow, this has really come full circle, hasn't it?
Yes, we become our parents, whether we like it or not. My last question, what gives you hope?
What gives me hope? Looking at kids today, I think that there's a lot in the future, and this makes me sound so old, but I'm just like, it's so exciting to go in to these high schools and to go into these middle schools and elementary schools and talk about not even just nuclear science, but to watch kids find their passions and watch that excitement really get there. Watch them say, yeah, I really want to do this for the rest of my life. I can totally see working in politics because I'm angry about how politics are today. I want to fix this. I want to do better. I want to do good with humanity and just make a better place. Even if it is just one person, it's so awesome to see that change happen. And I really, that gives me so much hope, because I know so many people out there in the world want to do good. I know there's that compassion, that trust, that blind faith in each other. And I feel like as Miss America, I really get to experience that firsthand. I was walking through an airport and someone recognized me, and listen, I don't look like Miss America when I'm going on the airplanes and everything. And they're like, hey, are you Grace? And I'm like, oh, are you a stalker or a follower? Because there's a difference. Like, there's a difference here. Obviously I didn't ask that, but it's, this woman comes up to me and she's like, hey, can I tell you a story? And I'm like, oh yeah, sure. I'm like, listen, I'm in a rush. Do you mind walking with me? I got to get to my gate. And she walked with me and she told me this story about how her brother passed away from a drunk driving accident, and how she really wants this to be shared, and how if you're drinking, put the keys down, put them away, don't even have them in your hand. Like, all of these sort of incredible messages that I've had so many experiences like that, where this woman did not know me. She's never met me before. She saw me in an airport when I'm in a rush and, like, obviously not looking like Miss America and everything. And she still took the time to just put that blind trust in me, and trust me with something so vulnerable and so deep. And I think that that's incredible. You know, we see that connection, we see that passion, and we see that trust in people, and that needs to be highlighted more. That was a very long answer for like a quick question, but I feel like it was a very deep question.
Well, I think that's a good place to stop, though. That's great. My guest again has been Grace Stanke, Miss America 2023. I love her line that nuclear is a brilliant, brilliant gift that we've turned our back on, and we need to turn back toward it. We're in full agreement on that. Grace, thanks a million for coming on the Power Hungry podcast. It's been fun.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
And thanks to all of you out there in podcast land for tuning into this episode of the Power Hungry podcast. Until next time, see ya.